If you've ever wanted to understand what it truly meant to fight in the dying months of a global war, the Battle of the Bulge is the place to start. It was a last-ditch gamble that threw veteran Allied units, exhausted after years of non-stop campaigning, into one of the most chaotic winter battles ever fought. When people romanticize the end of the war, they rarely understand that December 1944 to January 1945 was anything but a victory parade. It was a desperate test of endurance, improvisation, and survival. For anyone who studies conflict, strategy, or the hard truths of resilience under pressure, these weeks form one of the most important case studies you can learn from. So, let's get straight into the depth of it. By late 1944, most Allied commanders believed Nazi Germany was finished. Hitler knew that too, and that's why he gambled everything on an offensive through the Ardennes forest. He'd pulled off a similar shock in 1940. This time he hoped to smash through thin American lines, cross the Meuse, take Antwerp, and split the Allies apart. On paper, it was a fantasy. But the first hours of December 16th proved just how dangerous a cornered regime can be. The Americans manning this stretch weren't weak, they were simply stretched. Divisions, recovering from months of fighting, were placed in what was considered a quiet sector. That quiet sector erupted under the heaviest artillery barrage the Western Front had seen since Normandy. What followed is a lesson every strategist and survival-minded historian should note. Even at the tail end of a conflict, the enemy's capacity for violent surprise is never zero. This applies well beyond warfare. In any long-running crisis, political, environmental, or even business, anticipating complacency is one of the most practical steps you can take. The moment you start thinking the struggle is over simply because you're tired is often the moment you become vulnerable. Once the German armoured spearheads broke through, the map bulged westward, giving the battle its name. For several days it seemed like the Allies might actually lose control of the Western Front. Yet they didn't. And the reason is one many casual histories overlook: small unit leadership, independent action, and a refusal to accept collapse even when cut off. The stand at places like Bastogne shows this perfectly. The 101st Airborne Division, backed by engineers, tank destroyer crews, and stray units thrown together on the fly, dug in and held against overwhelming pressure. They did this without knowing when Patton's relief columns would arrive, or if the German timetable would succeed. They simply understood what their position meant and acted accordingly. When you study this with survivalist eyes, the principle is straightforward. When a situation exceeds your ideal conditions, your success comes down to how well you stabilize small local systems, your team, your resources, your perimeter, before thinking about the bigger picture. A modern, practical example would be dealing with large-scale logistical failure. No matter how organized your wider plan is, the success of the entire system depends on whether the smallest elements hold firm. Train your immediate group to function independently, and the larger structure gains resilience. The Ardennes in winter was no place for an army. Sub-zero temperatures froze weapons, stalled engines, and killed soldiers who slept too long without proper insulation. Many memoirs from both sides describe frostbite as common as incoming fire. The brutal weather grounded Allied aircraft for days, giving the Germans rare freedom of movement. Understanding how weather can shape a battle is one of the most useful ways to add depth to your historical analysis. But there's a survival lesson here as well. Extreme conditions magnify errors. In cold weather situations, whether you're hiking, training, or deployed, your margin for mistake shrinks. If you normally have 30 minutes to correct a problem, you might have 10. The men in the Ardennes learned this the hard way. They improvised insulation using sandbags, extra clothing, even captured German gear. Modern application is simple. During winter field training or any adverse environment, do a full gear audit before exposure, reduce unnecessary weight, and maintain dry layers at all costs. The soldiers who stayed disciplined survived the conditions long enough to survive the battle. The moment the weather opened, the battle shifted almost instantly. Allied aircraft flooded the skies, smashing supply lines and slowing the German advance to a crawl. Patton's Third Army executed one of the most impressive winter manoeuvres of the war, pivoting north to relieve Bastogne in record time. This part of the battle teaches an important truth that serious historians appreciate. Logistics, not heroics, end wars. Germany lacked the fuel to sustain the offensive. Tanks sat idle. Momentum evaporated. This is one of the most transferable lessons from the entire conflict. Whether in warfare or disaster response, you're only as strong as the infrastructure that supports you. If you ever need to plan a long-duration expedition, evacuation or resource-heavy project, study Patton's logistical framework. Break the operation into supply corridors, identify choke points, assign redundancy, and constantly reassess transport speed. The Allies won the Bulge because their logistics accelerated while Germany's died. By late January 1945, the German offensive had collapsed. They lost irreplaceable men, armour and fuel, speeding up the end of the war by months. But what matters to serious history students is how the Allies held on discipline at the lowest levels, improvisation under pressure, respect for harsh environments, and logistical superiority. These are universal principles. When you study the Bulge, you're looking at the clearest example of how a force that should have been defeated on the map survives because the people in the field refuse to break. And that is why this battle remains a cornerstone on Echoes of Survival. It shows how endurance, not perfection, wins when everything else goes wrong. If you found this guide valuable, subscribe, share, and help us continue bringing deep, no-fluff history to people who want the real story, not the watered-down version.